Okay, good afternoon. So, this recording is for the Literacy Course Introductory Lecture Part 2. I'll be addressing two things. This particular talk will be shorter than the one that I posted the previous week. I'm going to be addressing some themes related to the end of the introductory PowerPoint. We're going to look at some factors in student learning and research that have been found to emerge as key themes of focus for schools in determining how to impact literacy development and general student learning. Factors that are most important for teachers to be aware of and engage in to impact literacy development and learning in general. And then finally look at some student factors. That's the first thing I'm going to go through. The second thing I'm going to do is introduce the end of course final project that you'll have two options to engage in that I'll talk about here in a bit. So with the introductory PowerPoint, I am looking at slide 10, which would be the review of literature, school factors in learning and literacy. A couple of comments about the factors listed. Let's start with school factors in learning in general. Probably the most critical theme that has emerged in research on what is effective for schools to focus on that accelerates or improves student learning is creating what is come to be known in educational research vernacular as a guaranteed and viable curriculum. That phrase, while the words don't seem that complicated, it is lost and misunderstood at times. Guaranteed would simply mean that any classroom in a school or school system that claims to be teaching a particular subject or grade. Let's say you have a school district with 10 elementary schools. Every school has a fifth grade. A guaranteed curriculum would be at any of the 10 schools. You could guarantee families that the students in the fifth grade room in school A, school B, or school C are generally learning the same skills, and that you can predict and guarantee a consistency and a guaranteed aspect to that. The many schools that have engaged in that have found improvement in student learning results. Easier said than done, very difficult to coordinate and accomplish, but it can happen. Second piece to it is that it's viable, meaning is it doable? Are the number of skills and standards we're requiring students to engage in and learn? Is it viable and doable to accomplish within a particular grading period, semester, or school year? So those two pieces are a critical aspect. And a lot of schools around the United States have struggled with the viable part, particularly given how long the state standards list. Some from the National Common Core movement, as we discussed last week, some a combination of a particular state's previous standards and the National Common Core, which Indiana is a result of. You can put teachers in a situation where you're simply asking them to teach too much and asking students to retain and show mastery of too much. So the viable thing has been a concern in some circles, but a clear piece of research that's emerged for schools to be successful with learning, guaranteed a viable curriculum. Next piece, high expectations and consistent feedback on academic progress. That high expectation piece would speak to no matter where students are in their learning experience or what they bring to the table in terms of their experiences, their struggles in their personal and family lives, etc., there is a bar and an expectation that everyone is being moved towards. It might be at different rates. It might be with different resources and supports in place. But to say we expect everyone to be able to write a 5-paragraph essay before you leave this particular grade and course, and then knowing that everyone might need a little bit different to attempt to get there. One, consistent feedback on academic progress speaks to not so much grades, but explicit instruction to students on looking at where they're at in their learning experience after reviewing student data and saying, this part's good for you right now. These items need work, whether it's particular writing skills, and very explicit regarding what needs to improve. That has come to be more impactful than assigning a grade, A, B, C, D, or F in a traditional sense. And students are more driven, and it has been found more able to move forward when they get that kind of explicit feedback, as opposed to old school grading, which this course doesn't have a whole ton of time to get into that issue, but it's certainly something that is emerging. And I'm not suggesting that grades shouldn't be given. They need to be. But in terms of informing and in pushing learning forward, feedback on academic progress is more critical than sort of grades as a carrot in terms of motivating the student. The third piece, and this is mentioned in chapter 12 of your course text, which I've assigned for you to take a look at this week and respond to, in addition to the themes here and what we looked at in chapter 1. Collaborative practices amongst the professionals in the school. You'll see in chapter 12 it referred to as professional learning communities. Some of you in schools that have invested in that kind of work. The school system that I'm in, we've invested in it heavily as well. Collaborative practices amongst the teachers in a school have emerged in research as a significant improver of student learning, if you will, when engaged in and done correctly over a piece of time. Now, looking specifically at literacy and not just learning in general, what are a few things that have emerged in research? One, what some researchers call instructional or infrastructure improvements to help with literacy, and that gets at things that would be in place. If you think about infrastructure of a society in terms of roads or bridges or foundational things that we need and use every day, no different in a school. And typically the practical application of this is ongoing weekly and monthly professional development for teachers to get better at helping kids with their reading and writing skills. And there's a very well-planned monthly opportunity or set of opportunities to learn a particular way to help kids with something, go try it, and then come back and report and talk through if it was improved, if it helped students improve or not. So that ongoing constant professional development, following up on what was said before, as opposed to what schools have typically done traditionally, which is throw out something one time, just kind of hope and pray it. Teachers try it or stick with it with no real follow-up, and everyone just sort of moves on after the one day. Slide 10 at the end mentions the concept of text complexity. And the ACT folks put out a study differentiating between, maybe you have seen particular school libraries or reading programs will, like Accelerated Reader as an example, will use particular numerical systems to try to categorize the reading level of the book. Those traditional approaches are typically based on the words themselves and the level of the words, and tend to ignore the larger themes or different text complexities, as we call it, that would be in a particular reading selection. And this would be not just the words, but what the words put together, the themes that are put together. Are those themes age appropriate? Are those themes understandable for the particular reader? And that issue of text complexity, schools that have paid more attention to that have seen some improvement in the literacy results of their students. An application would be, I mentioned the Accelerated Reader earlier. Some of you may have remember being involved in those programs as a student. And sometimes those particular selections are light on deep application of applying things you've read into more complex situations. There are a number of things out there. Local newspapers, as an example, are written at a particular level, typically at a middle school level, but sometimes some of the themes in the newspaper are more complex and beyond the understanding of somebody with a middle school reading level. Really good example of text complexity. And if we're going to move students forward and make them better prepared for complex text, we have to understand that and do a lot of background knowledge work in preparing kids for those complex texts when they are presented to students, as opposed to just kind of looking at word definitions. So those are some themes on slide 10. Let's take a look at slide 11, which is a focus on what teachers can bring to the table regarding learning and literacy. Regarding learning in general, and either the most impactful instructional strategies, one of the things we'll do in this course is try to provide some different examples of some strategies to help students with reading comprehension or vocabulary development or writing that many educators and researchers have determined have been more successful. Give you an opportunity to know what they are, try them yourselves with students, and determine if they'll be helpful in your particular situations. Having knowledge of those different approaches and strategies so you can apply to different situations depending on what the kids need would be what we are getting at here. The second thing that's critical for general learning that has emerged in research is that teachers as motivators. I think historically the thought was we teach our content, it's up to the kid whether or not they learned it, they need to be motivated, etc. There is more of an onus than ever on educators to also bring a why to the table. Why are we learning this? Bring a motivational piece to it to really get students' attention. That cannot be ignored any longer. And teachers that are more successful, helping students move forward in their learning, that is always a piece that they pay attention to and really try to work at. Regarding specifically teacher factors with literacy, a couple of things that have emerged that we'll build on later in the semester. With that motivation piece, a compelling reason to read or write, not just to do it because I'm the English teacher or the principal says we have to do this for our school improvement initiative, but authentic, legitimate, engaging reasons that students would be interested in as to why do I need to read this? Why do I need to write about this? How does this impact me? How does this can help us or me? Teachers that tap into those things are able to advance kids' literacy development further. High interest text that are available to students, keeping reading levels in mind to some degree, but the text needs to be challenging and high interest. That is a critical one. And then having some strategies you can help kids that are struggling in that, and we will build on that later in the course, along with pre-teaching vocabulary, new context. Think about that text complexity I mentioned earlier. Being a builder of background knowledge and background vocabulary is one of the other items that have emerged for teachers that is as important as anything that I'm going to say to you in this course. And we'll build on that as we go in the semester. Finally, a couple of factors related to students, because they're a piece of the puzzle too, that impact learning and literacy. Just a couple of things on slide 12 I want to bring up. I've got in bold a word study from 2003 that has been reissued. Very interesting word study. The basics of it are this, that students that come to school having been read to start out knowing twice as many words as students that have not. And over a course of the school experience, typically that gap goes to anywhere from 4 to 6 times more words being known just because of opportunities and exposure at home with reading. And then that often means for us, if that's not happening, what do we do at school to accelerate that and get kids reading at school? So we're tapping into that idea of we're trying to grow word knowledge. Also interesting, our own state university, just over 10 years ago, did a qualitative study with high school students and surveyed them all over the state about engagement. And sadly, we found overwhelming theme of that particular study was that high school students in the state are bored, and their overwhelming feedback in very emergent in the University of Indianapolis research study was that if you'll do anything to make this interesting, I'm in, but if I am bored, I am out. And that particular feedback rose above type of student. Students with strong academic records said that just as much as students that were struggling with significant behavioral or engagement problems. So those are some particular factors that we need to keep in mind as we dig deep into this course and look at specific ways to help with reading comprehension or writing or vocabulary development. There's some general research-based things I think that if we're aware of, it can help us be more effective in our work as we tap into them. The PowerPoint that introduces the course does have a few more slides. It has an instructional framework for lesson planning. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks to address that. It's an instructional framework that's an acronym that's in Chapter 5 of the text. When we assign your first lesson plan that you need to do related to reading comprehension, I will come back to that later in the course. So the other thing I want to do today is talk about the course final project. So typically when this course meets in person, you would end with a presentation that you would give to the class over a collection of literacy related books that I have that you can choose from. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to introduce, you've got two options. As we established last week, literacy is such a wide-reaching topic and means so many things that it can just be too daunting. So one of the opportunities we want to give you is to choose a very specific topic within the literacy umbrella that you're interested in, you want to learn more about. Developing writing in students. How do I assess literacy? Reading comprehension. How do I make sure kids are identifying the main idea of what I asked them to read? We can do a deep dive in all of those things. Lecture. How do I make lecture more engaging and incorporate literacy skills, reading and writing as I do it? Option one would be that you simply pick one of these topics and you write a research paper on the topic. The basic expectations are listed in Canvas. Option two, I'll go over a bit. And what I would like for you to do in the next 2 weeks is email me what your intention is with the final project. If you intend to do a research paper, or if you're going to do option two, which is to put together a presentation and you're going to record it, similar to as I've done with this. It needs to be at approximately 15 to 20 minutes, maximum 20 minutes. And you would just send that to me as opposed to give it to the class. And in option two, you would be taking a particular book. You could look at one of your own and email me and get approval for it. I'm going to share a few right now that if you're interested, you email me, and then I will mail you the book on loan for the semester, and then you get it back to the Bethel Education Office at the end of the semester. Let me show you a few examples that I have. We have 1 or 2 math students in the course. I do have a book called Literacy Instruction within the mathematics curriculum. I am still, I've got 2 copies of that coming. I had 1 copy that I've loaned to somebody else. It's a quick read and it has great practical stuff that acknowledges what a math teacher needs to be doing, but embeds some things, particularly with reading and writing and speaking, as you're advancing the math skills you need students to learn. If you're interested in that, let me know. So here are a few examples that have worked well that students have been involved in. One of the particular literacy experts we're going to look at is a guy by the name of Mike Schmoker. In his book, Focus, he has done a few different versions of this book. This is the original. Elevating the Essentials to Radically Improve Student Learning. Mr. Schmoker is actually a former football coach in the Western United States and does a lot of, and an English teacher, does a lot of consulting work, particularly out west. And he is a big believer in keeping it simple. He is not a fan of differentiation, and differentiation is not something we're getting in this course a whole lot. He is more of a fan of simple, whole class instruction that's very strategic, very structured, and guides students through reading things as a group, together and individually, and then talking about and writing in response to what was read in chunks of time. You might read for 10 minutes, then turn around and talk to somebody about what you've just read. And he's a big proponent of what he calls interactive lecture, which would be to take a 45-minute lecture like this, exact opposite of what I'm doing, and break it up into chunk it into 5-10 minute pieces. The teacher would talk 5-10 minutes max, would stop. The students would either write in reaction or write to show comprehension or turn and talk to someone next to them. And then the lecture would continue after that. And there's this constant back and forth. Teacher lectures, stop. Students do something in reaction, stop. Teacher goes back. So I have a couple copies of this. Social studies teachers in particular, English teachers have really enjoyed this one. Elective teachers, if that's one you're interested in, that one could work. A couple of other examples. If you're struggling with how to help students with reading selections within your classroom and just comprehending basic information. I've got a few books that have great practical strategies on how to make that work. One, Reading Nonfiction, Notice and Note, Stance's Signpost and Strategies, and it has a endless supply, and then strategies around what we have come to know as close reading, which is a particular approach to helping students with reading selections that we'll go over in a couple of weeks. I also have a book called 7 Keys to Comprehension that has 7 particular very practical strategies. One of them, as a quick example, is teaching kids how to mentally imagine and develop mental imagery of what they're reading in real time, to help kind of go through a process to help more deeply embed and understand what's being read. If you're interested in more general research on what works in schools with learning in general, as I went over a little bit here at the introduction with the course, here's an option in a book by one of the leading researchers in the world, Robert Marzano, The Art and Science of Teaching. This particular book, and a lot of the books that I have, we've used in the past, you'll notice instead of reading the entire book, you'll actually read certain particular chapters that I've noted that I think are more pertinent to our course. And can be a helpful guide. This particular book, The Art and Science of Teaching, actually it's very formulaic in terms of it presents the scientific research that's been gathered on a particular way of helping students learn, and then it goes into the practical and how it plays out in the classroom, and will usually give reviews of interviews with teachers or examples of how teachers have interacted. And then it will end with some practical applications that you can try. A couple of other options, if you're interested in assessment and how to assess some of these literacy skills, this is a fantastic book. I mentioned this author and researcher in that introductory lecture on one of the slides about giving consistent academic feedback. And this could be applied to different literacy skills. It's a great read. And same thing, I have some particular areas set aside that you'll focus on as opposed to every last page in the entire book. Finally, if you're interested in looking at this from a kind of a newer perspective of social, kind of the whole student, emotional learning, motivation, here's one that has been used quite a bit. All learning is social and emotional, and this is how to take the literacy development piece and put it in a social context where students are constantly interacting with each other, and you're tapping into motivational and brain research. And then I have another one that's very similar, Engage the Brain, that kind of goes into the same thing. So if you're interested in those pieces, motivation, et cetera, and how to connect it with the topics of this course, I got a few options there too. So what I just want you to look at that, email me or text me if you have questions. Declare your interest, research paper and what the topic is going to be, presentation, what the topic is going to be, and I want to make sure we're good and you've got a topic that makes sense. I'll email back and say, yeah, that makes sense. I think we're good. Go for that one. If you're interested in one of the books, I'll get it to you. We'll talk about where I mail it, et cetera. If you're on campus or if you're off campus, I could send it to the school you're at. All right, so I think that's going to conclude my comments for part 2 of the introduction of the course, and look forward to as we continue to move forward in the course.